Hi, my name is Sarah Bonk, and I'm the founder of Business for America. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit group, and we're mobilizing the business community to help protect public health while ensuring the 2020 elections are safe and secure by expanding vote by mail and early voting during the coronavirus pandemic. The way we see it, we have no way of knowing what will happen with this virus between now and November, so we need to prepare for the worst case scenario to ensure no one has to choose between protecting their health and exercising their right to vote. We're asking the business community to get involved, and you can read about our work and sign our letter to Congress on the Business for America website at bfa.us. And that brings me to the reason for this video. As we've been working on this initiative, I've heard people from my next door neighbor to the country's commander-in-chief express concerns that voting by mail may not be secure, that it poses a greater risk of fraud than voting in person. And we figured, what better way to find out than ask an expert? And I invited Kim Wyman, the Secretary of State in Washington, to answer our questions about the security of voting by mail. Secretary Wyman, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I was eager to talk to you about security of voting by mail, in part because Washington is a 100% vote by mail state, but also because you're Republican, and we want to hear from both major parties on this topic. So to start us off, can you give us an overview of how elections are run in the state of Washington?
Yes, in Washington, we have 39 county election officials who are elected by their county electorate, and they run elections at the local level. We are completely vote by mail, which means every one of our 4.5 million registered voters gets a ballot delivered in every election they're eligible for. And then those county election officials are the ones who actually process and count those ballots and produce election results.
So I know you have explained many times in great detail how Washington ensures its elections are secure and accurate. And rather than having you exhaustively detail this, for this interview, I was hoping we could flip it around a little bit and instead help me understand what it would take to hack an election in Washington. What do you think?
Well, first, there's two parts to an election. There's the voter registration rolls, which is what we use to kind of keep and make sure everything is secure. But on the actual tabulation system, we're a paper ballot state. We mail each voter a ballot, and you would have to physically be able to get into each of the 39 county auditors' systems that are not on the internet. So you would have to be able to break into their facility somehow, get past whatever security controls, both physical and electronic, they have in place, and do whatever nefarious thing you want to do. It's kind of like robbing a bank, I think would be a good analogy. You would need to rob the bank.
Right. So it sounds like if I manage to get myself a job at the election board, so the ballots are arriving and, their ballot was there and I have it in my hands, am I able to then see who they voted for and maybe throw it out?
No, we have a large number of controls in place to make sure that those very things don't happen. First and foremost, they're paper ballots, but we have a secret ballot in a vote by mail environment. The voter puts in their ballot into a security sleeve that has no identifying marks. And so on the back end, that's one of the first levels of security we have after we verify that the voter that returned the ballot is the one that was eligible to have it counted. We remove the voter's name. So there's never going to be a point where you're going to be able to see how Kim Wyman voted, only that Kim Wyman voted.
Okay, so it sounds like the county election officials have pretty tight controls in place to make sure that the workers there can't see who somebody voted for, they can't tamper with those ballots. Once that ballot is received, how does a voter know that it was received and counted?
So let me kind of walk you through what happens to a return ballot. A voter can return it either by mail with the U.S. Postal Service, because we have prepaid postage in Washington state, or they can use one of our about 500 drop boxes that are located around the state that the county election officials pick up. Once it comes in, the first thing that's done, it's counted, and from then on, the election officials have to account for what happens to it. Was it counted or not? And if it wasn't counted, why it was rejected. Then the first thing that happens after it's counted is, physically counted, is the signature on the envelope is checked against the signature on file to make sure that it was Kim Wyman who voted that ballot and returned it. And at that point, we give the voter credit for voting, which means that even if they have 5 other ballots in play or have had those issued, that only one gets counted. And so that whole system, the voter can track remotely. They can actually go into their own My Vote portal, and they can look it up and they can see if their ballot's been received by election officials, and then what state it is before it's counted and whether or not it's going to be accepted.
So we touched on the signature check that happens at the election center when the ballots come in. What is that process? And what if they decide that my signature doesn't match?
Well, when the ballot envelope comes into the elections office, the first thing that we do is look at that and compare it to the one on the voter registration record. If those signatures don't match, they go through a number of steps. It's not just one person looking at it. And these are people who are trained by our state patrol once a year on signature verification. And so if it doesn't match, we send a letter to the voter giving them an option to make it right or cure that signature. Now, this does two things. One, it gives the voter a second chance. More importantly, if that voter hasn't returned that envelope, they are going to contact election officials and say, hey, I haven't voted. That's a fraudulent vote. And then you can actually do the voter fraud investigation on that front. And then from there, the voters have about anywhere from a 10 to a 20-day window, depending on when their ballot comes back, to get that signature into the county election officials so their ballot can be counted. So it's a good security check and it's a good accessibility opportunity.
Let's say I'm very enthusiastic about a specific candidate and I want to gin up more votes for them. How can I get more ballots? It sounds like you mentioned 5. How many ballots could I get exactly?
Well, I've had a long-standing answer to that question, as many as it takes for us to get one back. So remember, election officials' job is to instill confidence across the spectrum, from very conservative voters to very liberal voters. And we have to make them all believe that the election was fair and accurate. And so the way that we do that is that we make ballots available. And remember, you have a lot of days in play here because we start processing the ballots to get them ready to mail out about a month and a half before Election Day. In our state, we have a 20-day voting window that voters are going to receive their ballots and be able to vote in. So you have to backwards plan all of that. And it's interesting because voters move during that time. So you may have a voter who moves from Seattle to Olympia, so they get issued a ballot in King County, and now they want to vote on a local measure here in Olympia. The voters can get a ballot here in Olympia and still be able to vote that. And what we have built in is the controls. This is the key linchpin to vote by mail, is having the compensating controls to prevent more than one ballot being counted, so that even if I have 2 or 3 ballots issued to me, only one is going to be counted.
So I can't just go online. I know you have the ability to print ballots online. I can't just go print a bunch and fill them out and add different names and get a whole bunch of votes.
It doesn't work that way. So in our state, we have a statewide voter registration database that is live time. So if, for example, the scenario I had earlier, I moved from Seattle to Olympia, and I've already been issued a ballot in King County. When I go to the auditor here in Thurston County and ask for a replacement ballot or a new ballot for my new address, they're going to cancel that original ballot I was sent from King County if it hasn't been received. Now, if it's already been voted and received, they won't issue me a ballot for this current election. And so on Election Day, if I wanted to go to 6 different counties and try to get ballots issued in all 6 counties, one, I'd have problems because of the address, but more importantly, the election officials would be able to see that I'd already been issued a ballot in another county. They could cancel those ballots out and issue me a new one. So the controls are in place on the back end to make sure, just like your bank account, you can't, just because you have an ATM card, you can't go into an ATM machine and get money from someone else's account or get more money than your account has, because they have controls in place. Same principle.
I gotcha. So, well, what if I live in a large apartment building and I know the day that the ballots are likely to arrive, and when they get there, I just go in and I sneak everybody's ballot. Now I've got a whole stack of ballots from other people. Couldn't I just fill those out and send them in?
You certainly could. I wouldn't recommend it, however, because you would be committing a felony. In our state, it's a Class C felony, and it has not only fines, but the potential for imprisonment. So there's a big risk there. But if someone wanted to, again, using the banking analogy, if someone wants to rob a bank, right now, if you and I want to walk into a bank and rob it, we could. There's going to be penalties on the back end, however, and we'll probably end up in prison. So there's a lot of risk related, and there's a lot of things built in to try to prevent it from happening. And I think that's how you look at the election system as well, is that we've built in a lot of controls to prevent it. And if something happens, the fraudulent behavior happens, then we would prosecute. Okay.
So what if I did receive a ballot and my dog eats it? What do I do?
Well, you would contact a county official, and you could either do it online and download it on your own individual portal that we have available here in Washington, or just pick up the phone and call the election office, and they will issue you a new one. And I liken it to when you stay in a hotel and they have those plastic key cards. And if you leave your key in your room and you get locked out, you have to go to the front desk and get a new one. That front desk clerk can issue you 5 to 10 keys. Only one's going to work. And so that's really their security measure. And we have the same type of thing built in with ballots. Even if we issue more than one, only one can be counted.
Let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity or other things that could go wrong. What if there were to be a malicious hacker from another country? Or what if you just run a race and it's so close and people don't trust the totals? How do you validate that the data are correct?
Well, and really since 2016, that has been our primary focus across the country, is to strengthen our cybersecurity defenses. And here in Washington, we started actually probably 6-7 years ago working to build that voter registration system I talked about that is interconnected with our 39 county auditors. That is also our system that we use to do election management. And what I mean by that is how they actually manage who gets a ballot, how many ballots have been returned, all of that is done on that same system. So with those defenses, we have worked to not only increase the firewalls and all of our monitoring system, we are now also connected with our federal partners at Department of Homeland Security and the FBI in terms of sharing information about traffic they're seeing on a national level, and know how to block those bad actors, and having detection software to make sure that if they do get in, that we detect it and try to prevent it. And ultimately, if they are successful and everything is stacked in their favor because they can do thousands and thousands of attempts by the minute, and they have to get it right once, we have to get it right 100% of the time. We have backup systems and plans in place to be able to restore and recover from an event like that.
That's great. And I suppose ultimately, because you use all paper ballots, there's a way to recount if you have to.
You know, that's probably the biggest strength of the vote by mail system, is that everything is a paper ballot. Even people that go into a vote center on election day because maybe they need to use an accessible device, it always generates a paper ballot, and that's what's actually counted. And our state has been through the closest governor's race in the country's history. That was 16 years ago, and I can tell you the lessons we learned there really, for me, solidified why we need to have paper ballots in this country, because we can both look at a piece of paper and vehemently disagree on who the vote was for, but at the end of the day, there's something about holding that paper in your hand and arguing about it. Any kind of electronic voting system, you're arguing about lines of code, and you can't defend it in the same way you can defend paper.
I saw a comment the other day where somebody said that the only way people should be able to vote was to show up in person, have a voter ID. They think we should get ink on our fingers to make sure we don't double vote. Obviously, there's some advantages to going to a physical polling place, but can you tell me about some of the issues with physical polling places and why vote by mail has an advantage?
You know, I think there's a real nostalgic view most of us have about polling places, and we remember going with our parents to the polls when we were kids, that kind of thing. And that is the hardest part about vote by mail, is losing that sense of tradition and ceremony. But with that said, realize that voting in polling places has the same vulnerabilities as vote by mail, because that system is built on the concept that your poll workers know everyone in your precinct. And they know if you're not from our precinct, you shouldn't be voting here. I think in the modern era, people are hard pressed to know their next door neighbor, let alone the person 4 blocks away or someone that lives across town. And so this idea is romanticized, but I'm not sure it's valid. And the idea of an ID at the polling place, I think how you roll it out matters. Here in Washington, we've had an ID requirement for voter registration since 2008. Every single person that registers in our state provides either a driver's license or ID card or the last 4 of their social security number. We do check those against those databases. So we verify they're real people. And, that's worked for our state, and we have a low propensity and a low actual voter fraud occurrence. And so, I think it really speaks to the security measures we built in, and that's where we need to all focus on, is do the security measures to instill confidence.
Secretary Wyman, how do you maintain your voter rolls?
Well, this is something that every state faces a challenge of keeping the addresses up to date for each of our voters, because your address is what drives what ballot you receive as a voter, which issues you get to vote on, which candidates you get to vote on. So in our state, we do a couple of things. One, every year we're doing a complete list maintenance mailing where we're mailing to every single registered voter. So that means that we're getting updated addresses just from that general election. Then on top of that, we do a cross-check with about 29 other states through the ERIC project, the Electronic Registration Information Center, where we're data matching and we're seeing people that have moved or gotten a new driver's license in another state and updating our records and contacting those voters to see where they want to be registered to vote. And this is really important for states that are going to need to do a really robust absentee mailing. You have to have updated data to get the ballots to the voters. When Washington State first moved to permanent absentee voting, we would see 1 in 10 ballots returned because of an undeliverable mailing address. 1 in 10. Now we have it down to about 1 to 2% of our addresses are outdated or wrong and are undeliverable. So that's huge progress, but it's a lot of work, and that's many years in the making. And in fact, a great stat I'll share with you is in 2018, we matched our data on voter history between the states that had elections, and what we found in our state with 3.2 million ballots cast, we had about 100 people that may have voted more than once. We're still doing the research right now. And if we find that they did vote more than once, we're going to prosecute them. The counties will refer them to their county sheriffs and their county prosecutors. So is it perfect? No. Is it rampant voter fraud? No. It's a small percentage, and I'd say a large swath of those are probably mistakes.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's really no such thing as a completely hack-proof election.
I think when you can make banks completely robber-proof, we'll have completely voter fraud-proof elections. And until then, you're dealing with people, and we got to build in compensating controls.
All right. So for the states that decide that they want to expand the vote by mail option for the 2020 election, since we're in a global pandemic, what advice do you have?
Well, I think first and foremost, they need to embrace the idea that as many as half or 75% of their voters may choose to get an absentee ballot, even if they have an excuse absentee status in their state. And so you have to anticipate that exponential mail out of ballots, the high number of those ballots that are going to come back through the mail. How are you going to process them? Are you going to continue to do this at a local level if you're a township or a county processing set up for your ballots, or are you going to do this in a centralized manner? Are you going to have maybe the Secretary of State's staff process those ballots? And what does that look like? Do you have high-speed sorting equipment for your incoming mail envelopes? Do you have high-speed counting equipment for your ballots? Many states are counting ballots at the precinct level in polling places. So do you have the capacity to have the throughput to deal with hundreds of thousands of ballots coming back? And then most importantly, so can you get that equipment? Can you get it in time to conduct your election? And then can you build in the controls so you can account for each one of those ballots that's returned and tell the public, tell the media, tell the voter, well, how many were received, how many were counted, and how many were rejected and why? And when you can do all that, you can instill confidence, and that is our ultimate goal.
Yes, that sounds like one of the challenges for a lot of Americans is going to be not having election results on the night of the election.
Oh, absolutely. I think election officials across the country need to start setting expectations along those lines, because in our state, for example, you can have a postmark and have a ballot be counted as long as that postmark's election day or before. So we get a significant number of ballots in after election day that are still valid and still have to be counted. So yes, we definitely want people to expect that we're probably not going to know the winners of the races until Friday of election week or later.
All right. Well, Secretary Wyman, this is great. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm feeling a lot better about vote by mail elections. I hope our viewers will too.
Good. Well, thank you for taking time to ask me those questions.
Well, there you have it. Vote by mail makes it easy to vote and makes it hard to cheat in the state of Washington. When you do it right, voting by mail can be as secure or even more secure than voting in person. So if you're part of the business community, we invite you to get involved by visiting the Business for America website at bfa.us. And if you have questions about voting by mail, please comment below. And like they say, be sure to like our video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.